G'day legends, it's Mark here from North Oz, and in today's video we're going to be talking about how big of a problem is that rear axle being shorter than the front axle on my 79 series Land Cruiser, and whether or not it's a major problem and if I am going to fix it going forward. So stick around guys, today's going to be a good one. So about a year and a half ago when I started to look into the 70 series Land Cruiser and whether or not that was something that I wanted to spend a lot of hard-earned cash on, I did my research, looked at the forums, asked around, asked people at the dealership as well to see what their thoughts on when I was starting to look around as well, just to see what they thought, and obviously asked owners and had a really good look at all the YouTube videos and forums and that. So I had a pretty good idea of a lot of the shortcomings of the 79 series, of which there are many, especially if you're used to many modern vehicles. For me, I don't really have, and I never really had many modern vehicles anyway, so it didn't really bother me that there was wind-up windows and stuff like that and vinyl on the floor. For me, that's not a big deal. But one of the major issues, I guess mechanical issues, that kept on being raised by people in the forums and that was that the front axle was wider than the rear axle, and it's by quite a decent amount, and it's enough that it can upset the vehicle when traveling off-road. So reason for that, apparently, feel free to comment if I'm wrong, was because they dropped the V8 into the newer series of the 70 series Land Cruiser, and they had to widen the front axle for that, but didn't do that for the rear axle. So on a recent trip, I did on my first beach driving. So there's not really much beach driving to do up here in Cairns. So we went up to around the Wujal area. So if you want to see that full episode, I did a full episode on that with me and my mate Carl. We went off-road and pretty much spent 2 full days off-road, did 800 plus kilometers, and yeah, it was pretty cool stuff right before we had the big wet season set in, even though there's still a bit of water around. That whole trip as well was supported by Magic Mind, and they are the supporter of this video, and they have been trying these drinks out now for actually a couple of weeks, having about one a day, and they already have supplements in there that I'm already taking in pill form. So this has ashwagandha in it, for example, and I have been taking that for a couple of years, and it's actually in this anyway. So just a good way to get some extra vitamins, and yeah, various things in there as well, guys. There's a heap of stuff in there, and turmeric and things like that. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. So I do recommend you guys check that out if you're after, if you're after kind of like a bit of a drink that's got a little bit of caffeine in it as well, but sourced from good places. It's not like some of the negative ways you can get caffeine. So just wanted to mention that as well, that they did really help out with getting a lot of the footage that you're going to see in today's video. So yeah, shout out to Magic Mind. But yeah, I mean, in that trip we did quite a bit of mud. We did some river crossings as well, and we did some pretty deep sand as well. And the sand up there around Hopevale has a pretty high silica content, so it does actually compress quite well with a bit of water. But there's also, when it dries out in the middle of the day, it's bog city out there. And if you decide to go up towards Cape Bedford as well, it's pretty hard going in terms of trying to get from the main area around Elim Beach to that cape. And yeah, not the easiest thing to do, not the easiest terrain, but it really does test out the vehicles. We didn't go up towards Cape Bedford, but we did still do a lot of the mud and a lot of the sand around that area up towards Laura. But it did give me a lot of experience being able to use this vehicle in some tough situations, and especially around the sand. And one of the things that I really want to do this year, because I have some leave coming up from my job at work, is that to go to Fraser Island and to do some of the beach driving down there, which is something I'm really looking forward to. But I want to get a little bit of experience first, just to see if there was something that I needed to do, something that I needed to fix up or correct to make sure that, my trips are safe. And that was kind of the main thing, is make sure that I'm not going to be doing, potentially, 100, 200 kilometers of driving on the sand, and, making sure that I am safe and that my vehicle is safe during that whole time. So we're going to talk a little bit about some specific examples that I'll put up on the screen as well, so that you can kind of get a better idea for some of the situations I found myself in, and whether or not you feel like you want to upgrade your your rear axle area, and some of the options. We'll talk about that towards the end of today's video as well. But yeah, so let's get stuck into having a look at one of the first kind of situations that I found myself in, where I felt like I maybe was a little bit off balance and maybe it's something we can look at changing in the future. So the first situation that I found myself in was on gravel. Wasn't really that big of a deal. On gravel, you don't really notice that rear axle. And that's probably something that really wasn't explained to me very well going into purchasing the 70 series, was that you don't actually really notice that that rear axle is narrow. I mean, I carry a lot of weight in the back of my Land Cruiser, especially on the top as well. I've got quite a heavy rooftop tent that sits right on top of my canopy, and my canopy is not a short one. So you can kind of imagine that I've got quite a bit of weight and it sits up quite high. And yeah, you feel it lean around corners day to day, but you're being sensible when you're driving around. You're not going to be cornering like this thing is a race car, that's for sure. But day to day, that's probably something that people didn't really explain to me, or that I didn't really pick up from hearing about the negatives of this vehicle, was that day to day, you're probably not really going to notice carrying around maybe an empty tray, or, maybe just like a half full sort of canopy. You're probably not really going to notice that shorter rear axle, that more narrow rear axle. And, if you're just doing typical dirt driving, you're doing typical gravel driving, which is what I've been doing in this car now for the last, 14 months now, you're not really going to notice that shorter, that more narrow rear axle. So the first situation that I did find myself in after some gravel work, which wasn't really that big of a deal, it's really no different to driving on corrugation, and really no different to driving this vehicle on the road, was pretty much the main one was some sand driving. So I did notice that, and for context, I do still have the skinny wheels on this vehicle, which you will notice it's a workmate vehicle. So it means that it's got the skinnier wheels, not the GXL wheels, which again, we'll talk about why that might be something that we might change in the future. Maybe, we'll see. So the first situation I found myself in was driving along the beach of colored sand. So when you're driving along that beach, listen, probably the biggest issue that I found with this vehicle driving on the sand was more that I was finding the rear track was getting caught into one of the sides of the front track that I was making. I don't really feel like that the vehicle was constantly slipping into a track, which was, again, a bit of a misconception and a bit of a myth as well, that your vehicle is constantly going to be fishtailing down the sandy roads. I didn't really find that at all. What I found was that when there was, say, already a set of tracks there, and I followed in those tracks and made those tracks even deeper, or went through some even softer sand where it wasn't as compact, so I moved a little bit further away from the beach, so I moved a bit further away from the water. That's when I noticed that every now and then that the back would just slip down into one of the ruts, that was made by the front tire, or that I made worse by driving through that someone else had already driven in. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context as well, and I will be putting up some images up on the screen where you might be able to see a little bit of unsteadiness, a little bit of uneasiness in the vehicle, just kind of that back slipping into those ruts that were made by the front tire, and where I was a little bit further away from the sand. Likewise, if it was kind of an area where, it's a little bit muddy, for example, or where, the water was, going through and people had hit that area quite hard, or had maybe spun the wheels and there's a bit of a rut, you go through it as well, that's when the back would kind of find itself sitting into that rut. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea as to, on sand driving, that, yeah, in the soft stuff, I actually did notice the back trying to find some sort of groove to slip into, which I've never noticed that before. And I thought that it was actually me losing traction. I thought it was me, going a bit too fast, even though I wasn't, which again made me realize that, this is actually now what I'm experiencing is that narrow rear track. Which for me, like I said, was a little bit of a shock, and it wasn't really something I was expecting, because my previous vehicles, my Prado, my Hiluxes, my Navara, these are all vehicles that I've driven for a long period of time in the same spot as well, or very similar spot, and haven't had this issue. So it felt very unsteady, and it made me feel quite uncomfortable having all that weight, especially up the top. I could definitely feel it as it was starting to lean into those ruts. Could definitely feel that weight shifting from side to side. And although I never felt like that the back was going to tip, I could definitely feel like that that weight shift was not a positive thing, and I had to be very careful. Like if I was going a lot faster, Say I was trying to get from one side of Fraser Island, for example, to the other side of Fraser Island, I would expect that, and you're picking up some speed, I would expect that back dipping into the ruts could be quite a big problem. So that's something I'm a little bit concerned about at this point. Just having those wheels just dipping down with the amount of weight that I'm carrying. I have a full touring setup at all times in this vehicle. I carry a lot of weight. I got a couple of fridges. I got a full 1600 mil double drawer system in the back as well. So yeah, we're talking about a bit of weight in the back of this vehicle. Yeah, full lithium setups, everything. So we got a bit of weight going in the back there, and it definitely doesn't help things in that back setup. So I would say if it was a bit lighter with a tray, for example, you probably won't have as many issues as I did, but you could definitely feel that back moving. We'll go on now and talk about the second example, the second scenario that I found myself in. And this is probably one of the more obvious and probably the more scarier of the two anyway, which has me scratching my head just a little bit. There was a river crossing that we're coming up to, and the bank was made of clay, especially on one side it was particularly bad. The exit on the other side of the creek was pretty steep, and it was pretty solid. So I didn't have too many issues. So this was Laura River that we were at for this crossing. So when we got to this river, we pulled off to the side of the road. We could tell it was a little bit soft. We walked it, and the clay was just sticking to the bottom of our shoes or our thongs. So we ended up just taking a little bit of a walk and seeing, is this viable? Can we get across this area? And also, what does the river look like? So it's actually the entrance and the entry on that clay, that really heavy clay side of that Laura River, that I really noticed that back slipped. And this is probably the perfect example to describe what I was describing in the last example, where, my mate Carl drove through first, made some pretty decent sized ruts. I went through very close to those ruts as well, and again, that back just found its way slipping into one of the ruts. And because the clay had such like a hard surface to cut through, it made it like a really steep kind of a rut, if you would. So it was really like a lot more pronounced, as opposed to sand where it has a bit more of a gradual rut. In the clay, it's a lot more steep. So you'll notice that drop off into each side a lot more. So that was something that I did notice, that, as I, took on pretty close to the same ruts, that back did dip in quite a lot. I believe it was on the left side. I felt that back kick out. And then, I had to give it a little bit of beans to try to pull myself out of that rut so I could line up to the creek, to the river appropriately, so I wasn't going to go across it sideways. So that was a second example that I just noticed that was kind of, again, just a little bit on the scary side, just knowing that, listen, if I hit that with, a bit of speed or whatever, that could turn into a little bit of a sketchy situation. And it will reduce things like your speed and like, your confidence going in that really kind of, severe off-road environment where you're talking about a lot of mud and a lot of water and or long distances on the sand. So I kind of covered a couple of examples that I found recently in the last few weeks, and from my experience of that, it is a problem. It is a problem. Do I think it's as big of a problem as people maybe made it out to be? No, I don't think so. Because if you have a think about it, how often will I be finding myself in that situation? And it's only going to be very rarely. And when I do find myself in that situation, I think that just being a bit more sensible, reducing tire pressures, because my tire pressure was a bit higher than I probably would have liked to cross those rivers. Reducing the tire pressures, I think, would help a little bit as well, just so with these skinny tires especially, not having such a steep drop off into those ruts. That's my opinion anyway. It still obviously needs some testing, but 99% of my driving is not, or 0.9% as well, add that on there too, is not going to be in that situation. It's going to be either on the roads driving to the campsite or to the location that I'm going to, and then obviously, mostly corrugated roads and dirt roads to get to where I need to go. And then you've got a small amount of beach driving and mud driving. If this vehicle if I was building this for, say, a lot more muddy work, and I lived in an area that, rained a lot, but also had a lot of off-road tracks that were very muddy, and I enjoyed doing that on the weekends, then that would be a different situation. And I definitely would change that rear axle. But for me, as someone who is focused more on the camping, the touring, seeing nature, recording my trips, documenting that sort of stuff. That for me, and obviously building the car up and gaining experience doing that sort of stuff, that for me is it's fine. I don't have any issues at all with having that shorter rear axle at this point. So now we'll just have a quick chat just for those people that maybe don't know, you just want to, again, like I say, guys, these videos, and like I always say, these videos are just us, kicking it, having a bit of a chat. Have a look at some options at this rear axle and see what we can do to fix it up, what some of the legalities are around it, because I have done a little bit of research on it too, and whether or not I think it's worthwhile upgrading that rear axle. So let's talk about that now. Now, as you guys know, I am definitely not an engineer, and I'm just some guy on the internet. So what I'm going to say here is just from my own personal research, just from owning the vehicle and having a look, like I said, at some forums and trying to see what some of the information is out there on YouTube as well. So with the rear axle, and trying to get it wider, or at least the wheel track to get it wider, there are a few options that I've found. So a couple of them are more expensive than others. So basically, like at the very, very bottom sort of level, and there's, like I said, there's guys out there who know a lot more about it than I do. But at the very, very bottom level, for like 250, like $300-ish, you're going to be looking at a good set of like 50 mil spacers. So just 2 is all you need, 1 for each side. Problem with that is here in Australia anyway, or at least here in Queensland, is that that's not legal. You're not allowed to run spacers unless your vehicle was actually, like designed to have a spacer, which some vehicles actually do. I think like a lot of like race cars and stuff like that, or supercars, that sort of stuff. Some of them actually do have forms of spacers on there. So European cars, a few of them as well. So, but this vehicle unfortunately was not designed with having a spacer in mind, and does not form part of the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM. So you actually can't, like legally, you can't run them. So I guess you could get caught with them if you get pulled over, for example, or if you have an accident, for example. There could also be some insurance concerns about that as well. So that is, whether or not you want to run spacers, that's up to you. I did actually see, in preparation for trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this narrow rear axle, I did actually see a guy on YouTube quite a number of years ago that this video was made, and the guy mentioned that the spacers that he had on his vehicle did not affect the wheel bearings, because that's something that a lot of people talk about, is that running a wider wheel, or something like a more negative offset wheel, for example, which will do a similar thing, has quite a big effect on his wheel bearings of the vehicle that you're running it on. But he said that running his spacers did not actually affect his wheel bearings any more or any less in the types of driving that he did, which is something that's pretty interesting. So I guess, like, if you were taking your vehicle just off-road, or you used it as a farm truck, for example, then chuck some spacers on there. If you don't need to keep it on the road, you're not worried about legalities and all that sort of stuff, then that's absolutely something you can do. But this vehicle that I have here, it has to be legal. It's, for me, it's too much money to be risking to run some spacers full time, or to be it at any time, really, for me. So that for me is just not an option. So my next option, that's kind of the next cheapest, is to have a look at some wheels. So you can get some offset wheels that have a lower offset than the front wheels, for example. So they're they're called track correction wheels, but really all they are is just having the rear wheel with a lower offset than the front wheel. It's not like really like a designated track correction. So you could really get any rim you want in any style you want, but it's obviously you just have to do some maths and have a look and make sure that your offsets are correct. So there are some companies out there that do track correction on these vehicles, but all it is your rear wheel is going to be slightly lower offset than your front wheels. So that, and again, that can vary in prices as well. I mean, if you're buying for me, and this is again, just talking out loud here, we're talking about the negatives of that, is that for me, I would have to buy 6 rims and tires, because I would want to have a spare rim of the front higher offset rim, and I would want to have a spare of the lower offset rim, just in case you break it, and especially if you go with an aluminium wheel, for example, which I know they're very strong these days, and and the argument around steel versus aluminium is still debated. But I mean, for me, I like to run steel wheels on my vehicles. That's just how it is. This vehicle comes with steel wheels, and I'd like to keep that. It doesn't really matter what I do in the future. I would pretty much like to keep a steel wheel. We'll see though. You know, I'm open to options. So just in case anyone says in the future video, oh, you said you'd only do steel wheels and you're running aluminium, I am open to it. But I mean, for me right now, with this type of vehicle that I'm building this one out for, which is that I'm wanting to do long distance, really remote, steel wheels for me, I feel a lot more comfortable with at the moment. But for me, I would have to, like I said, run 6 wheels. And that means I have to find a spot for an extra spare wheel. So does that mean then that I'd have to take off one of my jerry can holders, for example, or both of them, so that I could fit, you know, what I would like to do, which is go up to about a 34-inch, you know, tire, and also give myself a little bit more width as well on the tire. So I mean, you know, then you're starting to sacrifice, you know, your storage space. Especially, I want to be able to carry 2 jerry cans. I've got a water container already in my canopy, so that's all sweet underneath it. So I don't need to carry water. It's just more about fuel, especially on the longer trips. And I don't really want to be changing out my tank for a long range tank, because I already get you know, about 900-ish kilometers. I could get more if I push it a bit further with the check engine light, but I already get about 900 kilometers out of a tank, which for me is plenty. And if I can carry 2 jerry cans, that would obviously give me closer to about 1,500 kilometers, which would be fantastic. I mean, that's great. It means I don't have to go out and spend a couple of grand on a long-range fuel tank. But unfortunately, if I wanted to carry, you know, like I said, that lower offset wheel and also a higher offset wheel, I'm going to have to sacrifice storage somewhere. Then you're also adding more weight hanging off the back axle again, which again is not ideal. Now I run a 1500mm canopy, which means that I don't have a huge amount of overhang, but I do still have a bit. I still have a bit over there. I don't have, you know, the lengthened chassis or anything like that. I don't have anything like that. It's still standard everything. So I have to be mindful of how much weight I am hanging off that back axle, even though I still have, you know, a ridiculous amount of things that I need to go remote and to go off grid. So like I mentioned, having that, you know, extra wheel in there does create some sort of problem for me anyway in how do I carry it. I can carry it on my roof rack. I do have a space up there on my roof rack for something, but do I want that to be, you know, taking all that wind and hurting my fuel economy? Yeah, you know, that's the question. So that for me is quite a dilemma in itself, which I probably could have made a whole separate video on anyway, given this rant. But but anyway, that's something that I don't really want to do. That might be something you want to do, and I do know guys that do have this set up, and you can see them running the 2 wheels on the back, and they're the different offsets. So if you want to do that, that's cool. But for me, I don't really, just practicality wise, it's not great. Then you've got the more expensive options. So those are kind of like your more budget options. And then from there, now you're looking at the more expensive options. So you're looking at like, you know, they're like these diff correction things. You know, you take out the centers of your diff and you put a new diff in there. That's about as maximum of my mechanical knowledge that I have. But that, as far as I know, is like the cheaper option, is to buy like all the guts for the diff, and then you can put, you know, the new diff in there. That's about as much as my mechanical knowledge stretches to. And then there's another one where you can actually buy the entire like diff housing and stuff, and then you can stick that whole diff in there. But we're talking big money at that point, guys. You know, we're talking whatever it is, like 10-ish grand, might be more, might be less, I don't know. It's been a while since I looked at those options, but and I don't really care about those options because that's a bit too much money for me to spend at this point. Like I said, I may end up doing some of this stuff with, you know, further testing, and with, you know, finding myself in a situation where it's like, okay, I either sell the vehicle and, you know, maybe make or, you know, have a loss on this vehicle, or I spend a little bit extra money on it to fix the issues that I have with it. For me right now, the rear axle, not an issue. I think that's fine. But there is something that I'd like to do to try and fix it, and that's something that we'll talk about now, which is I would like to try a similar profile tire. So I want to keep the 16s on there. I do want to increase the width of the rims. I don't want to go with a lower offset rim in the back. Like I said, I want to keep it square, we'll call it. So basically, yep, same tire, same rim setup on all 4 corners, and also with a spare on the back to rotate around too. I would like to go with a slightly wider width. I did find a type of tire that I would like to try in that width and in that profile. So I am hoping to get myself about another inch or so in profile, and also, yeah, about another like 30 mil or so in track width. And I would also, again, like to push out that that track in total. I would like to push that out about, if I can, about 60 mil if possible. And I am hoping to flare the front as well. So that's kind of my next plan. Like, that's kind of what's next for this vehicle, is that, you know, I've kind of got the whole touring setup done. I want to get the wheels and tires dialed in, and then I'm going to have a look at the suspension as well, because I'm well aware, and you know, my mates pointed out, and people that I work with and stuff pointed out, that yeah, the back is sagging. You guys pointed out as well in the comment section that yes, the back is sagging. Those rear leafs are great to, you know, stack up with, you know, the payload for this vehicle. You can absolutely stack it up, but for long periods of time, it's not really designed for it. So I will be looking at some sort of solution. I have talked in the past about doing a custom setup with adding an extra leaf or 2 to the pack and just leave it there. I'm not too sure at this point. Yeah, I mean, it's all about diminishing returns. You know, that's something that I'm really interested in, is that yes, although this vehicle is quite expensive, but I do like to have a look at diminishing returns on the vehicle. If, you know, I say I spend an extra $300 on adding an extra leaf or 2 to the rear pack, you know, it is spending 5 or 6 grand on a suspension setup. Is that going to dramatically improve the ride and the safety of the vehicle? That's something that I can't answer at this point. So for me, it's a lot of testing. It's a lot of looking at other YouTubers' videos. You know, Andrew St. Pierre White, he's great to watch as well. I pick up a lot of information from him too. So yeah, there's a lot of people out there that I'm like watching their videos and just, you know, trying to figure out what the best solution is for the whole suspension setup and for the wheels and tires. I do like, and this was the whole brief for me for this, and we are getting into a, you know, detailed rant now. We're in proper rant mode. So if you've made it this far, thank you, I appreciate it. But like, one of the things that I really wanted about this vehicle was to keep it kind of retro styling. I didn't go with the ridiculous big snorkel, Stano snorkel, kept it pretty straightforward with a plastic one, old school style. Bar work is kind of old school style. Wheels are still old school style. Like for me, I want to keep that about this vehicle. I don't want to do like chrome wheels and all that sort of stuff on this vehicle. That's not what I'm into with this build. I may do that in a future build, but for me, I like to make things how I like to make them. I'll share them with you on the internet. But for me, for this build, this build is, you know, it's for the channel. It's for, you know, this sort of thing that we're doing here, where we build it up. I show you all the parts and that. We do some travel and stuff and I film it. But it's also about trying to build up something that's going to look good, perform well, and do that for a long period of time. I don't want to put things on here that's just going to be like, oh, that's cool for now, but you know, in the future it's going to look outdated and that. That's not the point. The point of this vehicle is to try to build it up as a really solid tourer that I can use for a very, very long time. And I won't feel the need to look at it and be like, yeah, you know, people aren't really running those anymore. You know, I might change it to something else. That's not how I want to be with this vehicle. So that gives you a little bit of a background as to kind of, you know, it's very long story, short story long. But, you know, I did a bit of wheeling with this vehicle, found out that yes, that rear track can be a bit of a problem. I would like to try out a lower tire pressure on a bigger tire to see how that goes as well when we start hitting some off-road stuff in the next couple of months. Plans to do Fraser Island in about 8 or 9 weeks. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Really looking forward to sharing that with you guys. If you really want to see that video, make sure you let me know down in the comment section, because I have been waiting to go to Fraser Island for a very long time. So I'm super keen on that. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much everything that I can think of about that rear track. My experience of it so far, I don't see it as being a major problem. However, I can see it being a problem, if that makes any sense. And there are ways to fix it. There are legal, illegal ways to fix it. And we just got to be really careful as well to make sure that we are keeping this vehicle legal. across all states, because I am going to be traveling to all the states in this vehicle. So, and hopefully one day overseas. That is a bit of a goal of mine. So taking this vehicle overseas and doing some fun stuff with it. So guys, that's it for now. If I've missed anything or I went on a little bit of a tangent away from one of my main points, please let me know down in the comment section. Always happy to help. And the people that watch these videos, it's you and other people as well, they are really knowledgeable. So if you have any questions or you want to point something out to me, please do that in the comment section. I would say this with confidence that I have learned more from you guys commenting on my videos over the last 3 or 4 years of me doing this sort of stuff than I have learnt from, you know, doing my own searching on YouTube and on the forums and stuff. So I really do appreciate all the help that you guys have given me with, learning about this sort of stuff, but yeah, just in full drive stuff in general. So thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys down in the comment section. And if you have a 70 series like myself here and you have fixed a track correction or you've done, you know, different things like spaces and stuff, tell me what your opinion is on it. I'd love to hear it. Alrighty guys, I'll see you very shortly in the next video. Take care.